Kleiner Kellner, right? The words, slick with disdain, dripped like poison. Annalise didn't flinch, not outwardly. Years of practice. But rage coiled, a viper in her gut. They thought she was deaf. They were wrong. German, their secret weapon, was her first language. Another gulp of vintage wine, another cruel joke at her expense. Fools. They had no idea she understood every word. No clue she was Alistair Schmidt's daughter. But here's the kicker. Compassion bloomed even in her anger. This flicker of kindness, buried deep, was about to ignite a fire they couldn't extinguish. They think they are untouchable. They have no idea how her quiet kindness will change everything. Evening, two men dripping with arrogance and wealth decided to use a foreign language as their private weapon, mocking the quiet girl serving their vintage wine. They believed she was nothing. They believed they were untouchable. They were about to discover that some secrets don't stay buried, and the most devastating truths can be delivered in perfect fluent German. The air in the Ethelgards was thick with the scent of old money and new ambition. It was a carefully curated atmosphere, from the deep burgundy of the velvet banquets to the soft golden glow of the crystal chandeliers that hung like frozen constellations. Here conversations were held in hushed tones, the clinking of crystal silverware against porcelain, the only sharp sound permitted to pierce the bubble of extreme privilege. For the patrons, it was a fortress of solitude from the chaotic city outside. For the staff, it was a gilded cage where they performed a silent, nightly ballet of service, their own lives and identities checked at the door along with the fur coats and briefcases. Annalise Schmidt was a master of this ballet. At 26, she possessed a poise that belied her years and her station. Her movements were economical and graceful as she navigated the narrow channels between tables, her back straight, her expression a serene mask of professional neutrality. She could decanter 1982 Chateau Margaux without spilling a drop, describe the flavor profile of the pan-seared scallops with truffle foam in 3 different languages if required, and anticipate a diner's need for a water refill before they were consciously aware of it themselves. To the clientele of Ethelgards, she was simply the waitress, a pleasant, efficient, and utterly forgettable fixture of the scenery. No one saw the shadows behind her calm, gray eyes. No one knew that the hands that so deftly cleared away their plates had once held a scholarship to H. Heidelberg University, one of Germany's most prestigious institutions. No one could guess that her mind, currently occupied with memorizing the evening specials, had once grappled with complex macroeconomic theories and dissected dense financial reports with an acumen that had made her professors mark her as a prodigy. That life felt like a dream belonging to someone else. It had shattered 3 years ago, the day her father, a brilliant but trusting biochemist named Dr. Alistair Schmidt, had called her in tears. His small, innovative company, Schmidt Biosolutions, a firm built on a revolutionary water purification technology he had poured his soul into, had been gutted in a hostile takeover. The investors, a ruthless private equity firm, had used predatory tactics, exploiting legal loopholes, and manufacturing a crisis of confidence that sent his company's value plummeting. They bought it for pennies on the dollar, stripped its assets, sold off the patents, and left her father with nothing but crushing debt and a broken heart. The shock had triggered a massive stroke, leaving Alistair partially paralyzed and needing round-the-clock care. Annalise had abandoned her doctoral studies in Germany without a second thought, returning to the U.S. to become his primary caregiver. The mountain of medical bills and the debt from the corporate sabotage had forced her into a life she never envisioned. Ethelgards, with its high-paying clientele and generous tips, was the best she could do without a recent resume or the time for a conventional career. It was a means to an end, a penance, a way to keep her father comfortable in a decent care facility. Every night she locked her past away in a small locker in the staff room next to a worn-out copy of Keynes's The General Theory of Employment, Interest, and Money. She put on her starched uniform, smoothed her blonde hair into a tight bun, and became the ghost of Ethelgards. Tonight the ghost was about to be seen. They arrived at precisely 8 sure, sweeping into the restaurant with an invisible wave of entitlement that parted the air before them. The man in the lead was Harrison Blackwood, a name synonymous with corporate rating and unimaginable wealth. He was in his late 50s with a man of silver hair, a face that looked chiseled from granite, and eyes the color of a winter sky, cold and appraising. He moved with the predatory grace of a shark, his custom-tailored suit a dark armor that screamed power. Trailing a step behind him was his associate, a younger, leaner man named Garrett Vance. Garrett had the eager, slightly anxious look of a courtier, desperate to please his king. He laughed a little too loudly at Harrison's quips and scanned every room as if assessing its value and threat level simultaneously. The Maître Dubois, a man who prided himself on his unflappable demeanor, seemed to shrink in their presence, his usual gick charm replaced by a fingerance. "Mr. Blackwood, a pleasure. Your usual table is ready. It had better be Doobies." Harrison rumbled, his voice low and resonant, not even bothering to make eye contact. They were seated in Annalise's section at the prime corner table with a panoramic view of the city lights. It was a table reserved for the gods of this world, and tonight Harrison Blackwood was Zeus. Annalise approached with the water carafe, her face a perfect portrait of polite subservience. "Good evening, gentlemen. May I offer you still or sparkling water?" Harrison waved a dismissive hand, already deep in conversation with Garrett. Garrett was the one who answered, "Sparkling? 2 bottles of the San Pellegrino." Annalise inclined her head and retreated. As she poured the water, she couldn't help but overhear their conversation, conducted in English for now. It was about a recent acquisition, a tech startup they had streamlined core, which analysts knew was corporate speak for firing half its workforce. The board was sentimental, Harrison was saying, a smirk playing on his lips. They talked about innovation and company culture. "I told them culture doesn't show up on a balance sheet. We sold their server division to a competitor for a 50% profit in 3 weeks." End of story. Garrett chuckled. A masterclass Harrison. "Truly." Annalise placed the menus before them. "My name is Annalise, and I will be your server this evening. Our specials include a wild mushroom risotto with white truffle and a Du Sol Munir prepared tableside." Harrison Blackwood finally looked at her. His gaze wasn't one of acknowledgement, but of appraisal, the way one might inspect a piece of furniture. His eyes swept over her from head to toe, lingering for a fraction of a second too long, a flicker of something cold and dismissive in their depths. He said nothing to her, instead turning to Garrett, and then the language changed. "See, dear Ann," Harrison began in crisp, clear German, his tone shifting to one of casual conspiracy. "Look at her." Annalise's hands didn't tremble as she placed the bread basket on the table. Her posture remained ramrod straight. Inside her, however, a switch flipped. A deep primal instinct for stillness took over, the kind a forest creature adopts when it senses a predator nearby. Garrett, clearly fluent himself, leaned in with a conspiratorial grin. "I know Kleiner Kellner to a pretty little waitress, certainly not the sharpest tool in the shed." Annalise straightened up her face, still a placid mask. "Can I interest you gentlemen in a cocktail or a selection from our wine list before your meal?" she asked in perfect English, her voice calm and even. Harrison ignored her question, taking a sip of his water. He looked out the window, then back at Garrett, continuing in German as if she weren't there. "This is what I love about places like this. The service is anonymous. You can talk about anything. They are just part of the furniture." Annalise felt a slow burn begin in her chest. It was an old familiar feeling, the sting of being underestimated, of being rendered invisible. But this was different. It was crudder, more personal. She was not just a server. She was an object of their private amusement. She stood by the table waiting, a silent statue of service. She had to. Her father's care depended on this job, on the tips from men exactly like this. She could endure it. She had endured worse. But the night was young, and Harrison Blackwood was just getting started. He had no idea that the furniture he was speaking about was not only listening, but understanding every single venomous word. And he had no idea he was about to bring up the one topic in the world that could make or break her silence. The ordering process was a display of casual dominance. Harrison Blackwood didn't consult the menu so much as command it. "We'll start with the oysters Rockefeller and the steak tartar, then 2 Bonoan ribeyes medium rare, and bring the 1.5 Petrus. Don't bother me with the tasting. Just decant it properly." He waved his hand, dismissing her again. The Petrut alone was a $5,000 bottle of wine. For them, it was an afterthought. Annalise retrieved the bottle from the cellar, her hands moving with practiced precision. The weight of the bottle felt obscene in her grip. It represented nearly 2 months of her father's care facility fees. As she presented the bottle to Harrison for inspection, he glanced at the label and nodded curtly before turning back to Garrett, resuming their conversation in German. Also, Zeruku North Star, Garrett said, his voice lowered slightly, but still perfectly audible to Annalise as she began the careful ritual of decanting the wine. So, back to North Star. Annalise's blood ran cold. North Star. It was the internal project name, the code name the equity firm had used for their acquisition of her father's company. She had seen it on the few documents her father's lawyer had managed to salvage from the wreckage, a name that was seared into her memory, a brand of pure poison. Her heart began to hammer against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat beneath her calm exterior. She kept her eyes down, focused on the steady stream of ruby-red wine pouring into the crystal decanter. Her breathing measured. She couldn't react. She wouldn't. North Star was a thing of beauty. Harrison mused, a cruel nostalgia in his voice. He swirled the wine Garrett had poured for him, inhaling its aroma. Dear Alton Narmad Hatton's Elisa gloped the old fool Schmidt. He believed everything we told him. Annalise flinched. The insult was so direct, so personal. It was like a physical blow. Old fool. He was talking about her father, her brilliant, gentle, trusting father. The man who read poetry to her at night and taught her how to identify constellations. The man whose life's work was now being mocked over a $5,000 bottle of wine by the very monster who had destroyed him. Garrett laughed, a sycophantic, ugly sound. He was always talking about ethical obligations and the good of humanity, as if that pays the bills. Exactly, Harrison affirmed, leaning back in his chair. We created the narrative. A few whispers to the right journalists about cash flow problems. A fabricated internal report leaked to his key investors suggesting the purification tech was unstable. Classic fear-mongering. By the time we made our offer, they were so panicked they practically paid us to take the company off their hands. The restaurant, the clinking of plates, the soft murmur of other conversations, it all faded away. Annalise was trapped in a horrifying bubble with these two men forced to listen to a live recounting of her family's ruin. She could picture it all, her father pacing his office, his face etched with worry as the calls came, in his trust in his partners, eroding his dream, turning into a nightmare. These men hadn't just bought a company, they had orchestrated a man's collapse. The best part, Garrett added, his eyes gleaming with admiration, was using his own head of R&D against him. What was his name? Peter Sonnen. Peter Sonnen? Harrison confirmed with a smirk. We promised him a seat on the board of the new shell company. All he had to do was fudge the data on the long-term viability tests. The idiot signed an affidavit saying the tech had a critical flaw that would emerge after 5 years. It was a complete lie, of course, but it was the nail in the coffin. Schmidt's credibility was shot. Annalise remembered Dr. Peterson, a man her father had mentored for a decade, treated like a son. The betrayal had hurt him more than the financial loss. She finished decanting the wine, her movements robotic. She poured a small amount into Harrison's glass and then Garrett's, her face, an unreadable mask of professional stone. But inside, a glacial rage was forming, solidifying the grief and helplessness she had felt for 3 long years into something hard and sharp. They had moved on from appetizers and were now waiting for their steaks, the wine flowing freely. Harrison was becoming more expansive, more arrogant with every sip. He gestured toward Annalise with his glass as she refilled his water. He slurred slightly. Look at her, how she hovers. Direct. No idea what kind of conversations are happening right under her nose. The brain of a goldfish in a pretty package. Her biggest worry in life is probably whether she'll make enough tip money for her rent. Garrett snickered into his napkin. Vinegar Zorgen may glukuk neen less worry, more happiness, I suppose, that was it. The condescension, the cruelty, the utter dehumanization. It wasn't just about her father anymore. It was about her and every person like her who worked tirelessly to be invisible, for the comfort of men like Harrison Blackwood, the patronizing assumption that her life was small, her mind empty, her worries trivial, all the suppressed pain, the abandoned dreams, the quiet fury of the last 3 years coalesced into a single point of incandescent clarity. She had nothing left to lose. Her father was gone. The stroke had taken his life 6 months ago, a fact that made their current mockery feel like a desecration of his memory. This job was just a cage, and Harrison Blackwood had just handed her the key. The steaks arrived, carried by another server, but Annalise stepped forward to place them on the table. She set Harrison's plate down first, then Garrett's. Her hands were perfectly steady. She didn't retreat. She stood straight, her chin up, and looked Harrison Blackwood directly in the eye. For the first time all evening, he was forced to truly see her, not as a function, but as a person. He frowned, annoyed by her presence. "Is there a problem?" he asked in English, his tone sharp with irritation. Annalise took a slow, deep breath, letting it out gently. She felt a strange, terrifying calm settle over her. It was the calm of a captain about to scuttle his own ship to take down the enemy flagship with it. She met his cold gaze and held it. Then, in flawless academic German, tinged with the faint, educated accent of the Heidelberg region, her voice low but carrying the cold, clear authority of a judge, she spoke, escaped in data, her Blackwood. "There is indeed a problem, Mr. Blackwood." The effect was instantaneous and absolute. Harrison Blackwood froze mid-motion, his fork hovering over his perfectly cooked steak. The smug wine-flushed confidence drained from his face, replaced by a wave of pure, unadulterated shock. His jaw went slack. His cold blue eyes, which had held nothing but dismissive arrogance all evening, now widened in stunned disbelief. He looked as if the marble statue in the corner had just leaned over and asked him for the time. Garrett Vance choked on his wine. He sputtered, coughing into his napkin, his face turning a blotchy red. He stared at Annalise, then at Harrison, then back at Annalise, his mind visibly failing to compute what was happening. The silence at their table was suddenly a vacuum pulling in the ambient sounds of the restaurant. Annalise didn't waver. She held Harrison's gaze, her own eyes like chips of gray flint. She had his full, undivided attention. For the first time, he was seeing her, really seeing her, and he was terrified. She continued in the same calm, lethal German. "Music goldfishes. First, I'd like to correct a small point of grammar. One doesn't say the brain of a goldfishes. The genitive of goldfish is "debts goldfishes." If you're going to insult someone in a language you believe makes you superior, you should at least master the basics. It was a surgeon's cut, precise, devastating, and utterly unexpected. She hadn't just revealed that she understood. She had asserted her intellectual superiority in the very language he had used as a shield. Garrett looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. Harrison, however, was recovering from the initial shock, his expression hardening into a mask of fury. The blood was returning to his face, suffusing it with a dangerous mottled purple. "Who the hell do you think you are?" he snarled, switching back to English, his voice a low growl. Annalise did not switch back. She stayed in German, forcing him to meet her on her chosen ground. "Where is Ben?" she asked, a sad, ironic smile touching her lips for a fleeting moment. "Under Heidelberg." "Who am I? I am the one whose biggest worry extends far beyond tip money for rent. Though thanks to you, that is indeed a concern. I am the one whose goldfish brain graduated magna cum laude in economics from Heidelberg University." She took a small step closer, her voice dropping even lower, making it more intense, more personal. "But that's not the name you should remember. You should remember another name. A name you referred to as the old fool." She let the words hang in the air for a beat, watching the dawning horror, and then finally recognition in Harrison's eyes. He knew he was connecting the dots, her accent, her fluency, her presence here. "My name is Annalise Schmidt," she said, her voice vibrating with 3 years of suppressed grief and rage. "Dr. Alistair Schmidt were mine fart. If her first words had been a slap, these were a battering ram." Harrison Blackwood physically recoiled in his seat. The name spoken aloud confirmed his worst fear. This wasn't a random coincidence. This was a reckoning. The hushed elegance of Ethelgard's had evaporated. Diners at nearby tables had fallen silent. Their forks paused, their heads turned. They might not have understood the German, but they understood the universal language of confrontation. They saw the powerful billionaire shrinking in his seat and the quiet waitress standing over him like an avenging angel. Annalise wasn't finished. The dam had broken, and the words poured out, not in a torrent of anger, but in a controlled, chillingly precise indictment. She continued in German, her eyes locked on his viz. Dr. Peterson's stolen Blackwood. You spoke of North Star. I heard every word. How you spread the lies about the technology's instability. How you got Dr. Peterson, the man my father treated like a son, to betray his research. How you bragged about bribing him with a worthless board seat in a shell company. You didn't just steal his company, Mr. Blackwood. You broke his spirit. Her voice trembled for the first time, but she mastered it instantly. Après you, music, for the stroke he suffered 1 week after you forced the final signature, was not a coincidence. Your hostile takeover was a death sentence. You sat here drinking its equivalent value in wine while you laughed about destroying his life. He died 6 months ago. I hope you enjoyed the wine. The final sentence, delivered with icy finality, hung in the air like a shard of glass. Harrison was speechless. He was completely exposed. His vile conversation laid bare. He looked around wildly, seeing the curious and judgmental eyes of his peers upon him. The carefully constructed facade of the untouchable titan had been shattered by a waitress in a hushed restaurant. Garrett, pale as a sheet, finally found his voice stammering in English. Now see here, there's no need for this. This is a private conversation. Annalise turned her cold gaze on him. She shot back in German. It wasn't a private conversation. It was a public display of arrogance, and now it's a public display of truth. She straightened up her duty. Done. The rage inside her replaced by a vast aching emptiness. She reverted to English, her voice crisp and professional, the mask of the server clicking back into place one last time. It was the most powerful move she could make. Will there be anything else, gentlemen? Harrison Blackwood finally surged to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the polished floor. His face was a thunderous mask of fury and humiliation. You're fired, he bellowed, pointing a trembling finger at her. You'll never work in this city again. Before Annalise could respond, Mr. Dubois materialized at her side. He had heard the commotion and seen the entire exchange. He looked at the trembling, furious billionaire, then at the impossibly composed waitress, and at the dozen pairs of eyes from the city's elite watching him. He made a calculation. Mr. Blackwood Dubois said, his voice firm, his French accent thick with authority. Mademoiselle Schmidt is my employee, not yours, and in my establishment, we do not tolerate the abuse of our staff. Perhaps it is you who should leave. The collective gasp from the surrounding tables was audible. Dubois had just chosen a waitress over one of his wealthiest patrons. Annalise took a small black leather billfold from her apron pocket. With a steady hand, she placed it on the table next to Harrison's uneaten steak. Your check, Mr. Blackwood, she said, her voice even, nuding the Petrus. It was the ultimate act of defiance. She wasn't just exposing him, she was serving him the bill for it. Harrison stared at the bill, then at Annalise, his mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. Defeated, humiliated, and utterly silenced, he threw some cash onto the table, grabbed his coat, and stormed out of the restaurant. Garrett scurrying behind him like a chastened dog. The moment they were gone, a strange thing happened. A ripple of soft, spontaneous applause broke out from the surrounding tables. It wasn't loud or boisterous, but it was unmistakable. It was a murmur of support, of respect, a quiet acknowledgement of courage in a place where it was so rarely seen. Annalise simply nodded, a silent thank you to the anonymous faces. Then she turned and walked. Not ran toward the sanctuary of the staff exit. The gilded cage's door finally opened, the moment the swinging kitchen doors closed behind her. Annalise's composure crumbled. She leaned against the cool stainless steel wall, her legs suddenly feeling like water. Her breath came in ragged, shuddering gasps. The adrenaline that had fueled her righteous fury drained away, leaving behind the profound bone-deep exhaustion of a soldier after a long and brutal war. The victory felt hollow, overshadowed by the fresh wave of grief that washed over her. She had spoken the truth. She had avenged her father's memory in some small way, but it wouldn't bring him back. Tears she hadn't allowed herself to shed for months streamed silently down her cheeks, not of sadness, but of pure cathartic release. Her colleagues, the other waiters, and kitchen staff, who had witnessed the tail end of the confrontation through the porthole window of the door, kept a respectful distance. They saw her tears not as weakness, but as the aftermath of a monumental display of strength. The head chef, a burly man named Antoine, quietly placed a glass of water on a nearby prep counter for her. It was a small gesture of solidarity in their shared world of service. A few minutes later, Ms. Dubois entered the kitchen. His face, usually a mask of professional stress, was uncharacteristically gentle. He approached Annalise cautiously. "Mademoiselle Schmidt," he began softly. "Annalise, are you all right?" She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and straightened up, trying to regain a semblance of professionalism. "I apologize, Mr. Dubois. I lost my composure. I understand if you have to let me go. I will clear out my locker." Dubois held up a hand. "Let you go, Annalise. What you did. It took a courage I have not seen in a very long time. That man Blackwood, he is a bully who believes his money makes him a king. Tonight you showed him he is just a man, a cruel one at that." He sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "I will not lie to you. He will likely try to cause problems for this restaurant. He is powerful, but Ethel Guards has a reputation that predates Harrison Blackwood, and it will endure long after he is forgotten. My reputation, however, would not survive if I fired an employee for defending her dignity and her family's honor." He paused, his expression serious. "You have a home here for as long as you want it. Take the rest of the night off. Go home and rest." Annalise was stunned. In a world where the customer was always right, especially a customer who could buy and sell the entire block, her manager had chosen to stand by her. "Thank you, Monsieur," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "It means more than you know." As she gathered her things from her locker, her worn-out purse, her coat, and the old economics textbook, she felt a profound shift in her own perception. She had walked into work that evening as a ghost resigned to her fate. She was walking out as Annalise Schmidt, daughter of a Lestister Schmidt, a woman who had spoken truth to power and had not been struck down. The story, however, didn't end when she walked out the door. Unbeknownst to anyone at the time, one of the patrons who had witnessed the entire drama was Evelyn Reed, a senior investigative journalist for the New York Chronicle. She had been dining with an off-the-record source, but the scene at Blackwood's table had quickly become the only story in the room. Evelyn, who had a nose for hypocrisy and a deep-seated dislike for corporate predators, had recorded the last part of the exchange on her phone, capturing Blackwood's furious exit and the subsequent applause. She didn't understand the German, but she understood the power dynamics. She spent the next hour discreetly interviewing 2 other diners and a busboy, piecing together the narrative. She had the names Harrison Blackwood and Annalise Schmidt. By the time Annalise was on the subway home, her story was already taking on a life of its own. The next morning it broke. Evelyn Reed's article was published on the front page of the Chronicle's digital edition under a blaring headline, "The Billionaire and the Waitress of Ethgards: How a Secret Conversation in German Exposed the Rotten Heart of a Corporate Raider." The article was a masterpiece of narrative journalism. It detailed the scene at the restaurant with cinematic flair, contrasted Blackwood's immense wealth with Annalise's quiet dignity. And most importantly, Evelyn had done her homework overnight. She had cross-referenced North Star and Schmidt and uncovered the basic details of the hostile takeover of Schmidt Biosolutions. She painted a devastating picture of a brilliant scientist being ruined by a heartless predator. The story of Annalise the prodigy, forced to become a waitress to care for her dying father, was the emotional core that made the story explode. By 9:04 a.m., Ethelgard's Waitress was trending on social media. The story was everywhere. It was the perfect David and Goliath tale for the digital age. People shared it with furious comments about corporate greed and heartfelt praise for Annalise's bravery. Someone dug up her academic records from H. Heidelberg, confirming her story. A picture of her father, Dr. Alistair Schmidt, accepting an award for innovation began to circulate. The fallout for Harrison Blackwood was immediate and catastrophic. The stock price of his flagship firm, Blackwood Capital, began to nosedive as soon as the market opened. His board of directors, the same people who had applauded his ruthless tactics in private, were now terrified of the public relations nightmare. The story wasn't just about him being a jerk in a restaurant. It was about the fraudulent methods he'd used in the North Star acquisition. The mention of a bribed researcher in a fabricated report about the tech's viability caught the attention of more than just the public. It caught the attention of the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC. Garrett Vance was the first casualty. He was fired before lunch, a sacrificial lamb offered up in a desperate attempt to contain the damage. Blackwood issued a half-hearted lawyer-vetted apology for his inappropriate language, which the public immediately tore apart as insincere. For Annalise, the day was a surreal whirlwind. Her phone, a cheap prepaid device, buzzed incessantly with calls and texts from numbers she didn't recognize. Reporters camped outside her small apartment building. She stayed inside watching the story unfold on her laptop, feeling detached, as if she were reading about someone else. Then late in the afternoon, an email arrived that cut through the noise. The sender was Robert Chen, the CEO of Phoenix Holdings, a rival investment firm known for its focus on sustainable and ethical ventures. Chen had been a longtime admirer of her father's work and had even tried to partner with Schmidt Biosolutions years ago before Blackwood had swept in. The email was brief and to the point, subject: your father's legacy. Dear Ms. Schmidt, I have just read the story in the Chronicle. I knew your father and I know what the world lost when his work was dismantled. What you did last night took incredible courage. But what interests me more is the intellect that was so clear in your takedown of Mr. Blackwood. My firm, Phoenix Holdings, is launching a new division focused on identifying and funding socially responsible technological innovation. Exactly the kind of work your father championed. We need someone to lead it, someone with a background in economics, an understanding of technology, and an unimpeachable moral compass. This is not a gesture of pity. This is a job offer. I believe you are the most qualified person for this role. If you are interested, my door is always open. Sincerely, Robert Chen. Annalise read the email 3 times. Her hands trembled. But this time it wasn't from fear or shock. It was from hope. A fragile, unfamiliar tendril of hope rising from the ashes of her past. This wasn't just a job. It was a chance to reclaim her own future and to continue her father's legacy in a way she never thought possible. The echo of her words at Ethelgard's hadn't just torn down a bully. It had built her a bridge to a new life. 1 week after the incident at Ethelgard's, the world had irrevocably shifted for both Annalise Schmidt and Harrison Blackwood. For Blackwood, the descent was swift and brutal. The SEC launched a formal investigation into the North Star acquisition, citing Evelyn Reed's article. Dr. Peterson, the researcher Blackwood had bribed, saw the writing on the wall. Faced with potential federal charges, he agreed to cooperate fully with investigators, providing evidence of the fabricated reports and the terms of his illicit deal with Blackwood Capital. The scandal was no longer a matter of public opinion. It was a matter of criminal inquiry. Blackwood was forced to step down as CEO, his name now a toxic asset. The empire he had built on fear and intimidation was crumbling under the weight of a single, truth-filled conversation. For Annalise, the ascent was just as rapid, but far more profound. After a weekend of careful consideration, she had accepted Robert Chen's offer. She walked into the gleaming downtown offices of Phoenix Holdings, not as a waitress, but as the newly appointed director of the Ethical Innovation Initiative. The contrast with her previous life was stark. Instead of a cramped staff locker, she had a spacious corner office with a view that rivaled the one from Ethelgard's. Instead of a starched uniform, she wore a simple but elegant business suit that felt like both an armor and a liberation. Her colleagues didn't look through her. They looked to her for guidance and expertise. Her first meeting was with Robert Chen himself. He was a man in his 60s with kind eyes and a firm handshake, the antithesis of Harrison Blackwood. Annalise, he said, gesturing for her to sit. I want to be clear about why you're here. The world is full of intelligent people. It is full of economists and financial analysts. What is rare is wisdom. The wisdom to know that how you make money is just as important as how much you make. Your father had that wisdom, and from everything I've seen, so do you. He slid a file across the polished table. This is our first project for the new division. It's a portfolio of startups working on everything from sustainable agriculture to affordable medical diagnostics. I want you to vet them. Find the ones that have the potential to change the world for the better. Find the next Schmidt Biosolutions. And this time, let's make sure we protect it. As Annalise opened the file, she saw a list of names and ideas brimming with hope and ingenuity. It felt like coming home. The part of her brain that had been dormant for 3 years, the part that loved data and complex systems sparked back to life. But now it was tempered with the hard-won wisdom of her experience. She would look not just at the balance sheets, but at the people behind them. She would listen not just to what they said, but to how they said it. Her first major act as director was a personal one. Using her newfound resources and connections, she initiated legal proceedings to reacquire the patents for her father's water purification technology. Blackwood Capital, now in disarray and desperate to shed its toxic assets, settled almost immediately, selling them back for a fraction of their true worth. Annalise established a foundation in her father's name, placing the patents in a public trust to be licensed at low cost to developing nations. Her father's life's work would finally serve the good of humanity, just as he had always intended. One evening, about a month into her new role, Annalise found herself working late. As she packed her briefcase, she looked out her office window at the sprawling tapestry of city lights. Far below, nestled amongst the skyscrapers, she could just make out the warm glow of Ethel guards. She thought of the girl she had been, the ghost in the gilded cage, moving silently with her grief. She had thought that strength meant enduring the pain, hiding it away. She realized now that true strength was speaking it aloud, no matter the cost. She had not set out for revenge. Revenge was a fire that consumed everything. What she had achieved was something more lasting: justice. And from the ashes of that confrontation, something new and beautiful was rising. Her father's legacy was secure. Her own future, once a bleak landscape of obligation, was now a horizon of limitless possibility. She turned off the light in her office, leaving the city to its nightly glitter. She was no longer a waitress serving the powerful. She was one of them now, but on her own terms, guided by a different set of values. Annalise Schmidt was finally free, not just from her past, but to build a better future. The ghost of Ethelgard's had found her voice, and it was a voice that would now help shape the world. 6 months passed. The chill of autumn gave way to the deep freeze of winter, and with the changing of the seasons, the landscape of Annalise's life transformed completely. She was no longer defined by the trauma of her past, but by the promise of the future she was actively building. At Phoenix Holdings, she wasn't just an employee, she was a force. She moved with a quiet, earned confidence. Her intelligence no longer a hidden weapon, but a tool she used daily to construct, to nurture, and to empower. Her first major success was the funding of Vidian Dynamics, a small startup founded by 2 brilliant but underfunded engineers who had developed a biodegradable polymer to replace single-use plastics. Annalise had seen past their shaky presentation and into the heart of their science. Recognizing the same spark of world-changing potential her father had possessed, she championed their cause within Phoenix, structuring a deal that gave them the capital they needed without sacrificing their mission. The project was a resounding success, earning praise from environmental groups and positioning Phoenix Holdings at the forefront of the green tech revolution. Robert Chen had taken to calling her the architect because she didn't just find innovation. She built the frameworks for it to thrive. The news about Harrison Blackwood became background noise, a distant echo of a battle long won. He was mired in legal proceedings, his fortune bleeding away in lawyers' fees and SEC fines. His name was a punchline in financial circles, a cautionary tale about hubris. Annalise felt no satisfaction in his downfall, only a detached sense of an equation finally being balanced. Her focus was on building, not destroying. One crisp Tuesday afternoon, an email landed in her inbox that pierced the calm of her new reality. The sender's name was Garrett Vance. Annalise stared at the name, a phantom ache of memory surfacing. She remembered his sycophantic laughter, his pale, panicked face in the restaurant. She almost deleted the email, but a sense of unresolved curiosity stayed her hand. She opened it. The message was short, stripped of the corporate jargon he had once spouted. Ms. Schmidt, I know you have no reason to read this, let alone respond. I am not writing to ask for forgiveness, as I know I have no right to it. I am writing to ask for 5 minutes of your time. There are things I feel I must say to you in person, not as an excuse, but as an explanation. I will be at the coffee shop on the corner of your building, the Daily Grind, tomorrow at 100 p.m. If you do not come, I will understand completely and will not bother you again. Sincerely, Garrett Vance. Her first instinct was to refuse. Why dredge up the ugliest night of her life? But as she considered it, she realized this wasn't about him. It was about her. It was about closing the final chapter, about understanding the full anatomy of the system that had victimized her family. She needed to see what became of the men who weren't titans, but merely the men who propped them up. The next day, she walked into the Daily Grind. Garrett was sitting at a small table in the back, and he was nearly unrecognizable. The sharp suit was gone, replaced by a frayed sweater. His face was gaunt, his eyes shadowed with a weariness that went beyond simple fatigue. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out. He flinched when he saw her, then stood up awkwardly. Ms. Schmidt, Annalise, thank you for coming. I have 5 minutes, Mr. Vance, she said, her tone neutral as she remained standing. He nodded, motioning to the empty chair. Please. She sat, her posture straight, her hands folded on the table. I don't know where to start, he began, his voice raspy. I lost everything after that night. My job, my reputation, my fiancé left me. I deserved all of it. For months, I was just angry at Blackwood, at the journalist, even at you. But that was the coward's way out. He looked down at his hands. The truth is, I knew what Blackwood was. I knew the North Star deal was rotten. I saw how he operated, how he enjoyed the cruelty. And I went along with it. I admired it. I wanted to be him. I told myself it was just business, that people like your father were just unfortunate but necessary collateral damage on the path to success. He finally looked up, and Annalise saw tears welling in his eyes. What I want to say is, I'm sorry. I am sorry for my part in what happened to your father. I'm sorry for what I said, what I thought, and what I failed to do. I was a ghoul feeding on the scraps of a monster's table. And I needed to say that to you, face to face. Annalise listened, her expression unreadable. She had expected excuses, pleas, a desperate attempt at manipulation. She had not expected this raw, pathetic confession. She saw in him not a villain, but a profound and tragic failure of character. Why tell me this now, she asked quietly. Because I have to start over, he said, and I can't build anything new on a foundation of lies. I'm working a stocking job in a warehouse in Queens. It's honest work. It's quiet. It gives me a lot of time to think, and I realize that the only person I was truly fooling back then was myself. Annalise was silent for a long moment. She could destroy him with a few cold words. She could walk away and leave him in his self-pity. But that was Blackwood's way. That wasn't hers. Redemption isn't about getting forgiveness from those you've wronged, Mr. Vance. She said, her voice softer now, but no less firm. It's a debt you pay to yourself. You don't fix the past by apologizing for it. You atone for it by what you do next. Find a way to do some good. It doesn't have to be grand. Just be a better man than you were. That's the only apology that will ever matter. She stood up. I wish you peace, Mr. Vance. With that, she turned and walked out, leaving him with her final unexpected gift, a roadmap, not to her forgiveness, but to his own salvation. That evening, Annalise made a reservation. She walked into Ethelard's not through the staff entrance, but through the grand front doors. She was greeted not with the expectation of service, but with the reverence afforded to a legend. Moudubois himself came forward, his face breaking into a wide, genuine smile. Annalise, it is an honor to have you back. The honor is mine, Jean-Pierre, she said, using his first name for the first time. A table for one, please. He didn't hesitate. He led her personally across the plush carpet, past the curious eyes of the new wave of patrons, and seated her at the prime corner table. her table. As she sat there looking out at the same city lights, she felt the last vestiges of the ghost she once was fade away. She was the architect of her own world now. She ordered a simple, elegant meal and a glass of sair. She ate slowly, savoring every bite, not as a former waitress in awe, but as a woman who knew her own worth. Her meal was a silent celebration of her journey. It was an homage to her father, a reclamation of a space that had once been the site of her deepest humiliation, and a toast to the boundless future. When the check came, she paid it, leaving a generous tip for the young waitress, who served her a girl with bright, hopeful eyes, who reminded Annalise just a little of herself. This story is a powerful reminder that there is often more to people than meets the eye. Behind a uniform or a job title, there can be a wealth of experience, intelligence, and untold stories. Annalise's journey shows us that dignity isn't something that can be taken away by contempt or arrogance. It's something we claim for ourselves. Her courage to speak her truth in the face of overwhelming power didn't just expose a cruel man. It unlocked her own potential and reclaimed her father's legacy. It's a testament to the idea that one voice speaking with conviction can indeed change the world, or at least their small corner of it. If this story of resilience, justice, and the triumphant power of the human spirit resonated with you, please help us share more stories like it. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that will inspire and move you. Thank you for listening.